Ernst Lubitsch leaned into life. He walked quickly, abruptly, pigeon-toed, always kept up a steady stream of energy on a film set. Between shots, he'd play the piano to keep everything light and fun and brisk. Actors loved him, crew loved him. He loved what he did. And what he did loved him back. He was born in Berlin. His father had a woman's clothing store called Ernst Lubitsch. And Simon very much wanted his son to go into business with him, so it could be Ernst Lubitsch and Son. But Ernst had zero desire to go into the women's clothing business. From almost the beginning of his life, he was enthralled by show business. His initial ambition was to act, and he was very successful within the cabaret scene in Berlin. And he was a perpetual motion machine. He was constantly working, zipping around from one gig to another in order to make a living, in order to support his family. He just never stopped. So part of that, to bring in more money, he started staging things as well, and found that he had a real knack for staging, both theater and for film. And because he was doing a little bit of everything, it was only a question of time until he matriculated into the movie business. There are a couple of very distinct phases in Lubitsch's career. There's the acting phase, the comic phase, where he's playing Meyer, this aggressive Jewish character from Berlin. Then he segues out of that into directing other people's pictures. And then he segues into historical epics. So he made movies like Passion, about the French Revolution, and an epic about Henry VIII with Emil Jannings. And nobody in America, other than D.W. Griffith, was making these kinds of pictures. So the pictures got bought for America and exhibited in America, and the reviews immediately noticed something very different about Lubitsch's historical epics from Griffith's historical epics, because Griffith liked actresses such as Lillian and Dorothy Gish and Carol Dempster, who did not bring a particular erotic charge to the work, to their parts, to the movie. Lubitsch's actresses brought a very definite erotic charge to their films. You couldn't avoid it. You couldn't avoid it. And so audiences, especially audiences in the big cities, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, really responded to the Lubitsch historical epics. So it was only a question of time until he was going to come over here and make movies. And it was Mary Pickford who pulled the trigger. Mary Pickford was beginning to have a professional identity crisis because she had made her career on the basis of essentially playing adolescent girls in movies like Poor Little Rich Girl and Melissa. And that was all well and good, but up to a certain point, she needed to make a transition to adult roles. And she knew this was going to be a creative problem in getting the audience to accept her, even though she was already well into her 20s at this time, pushing 30 years old. So she hired Lubitsch, who had such huge success with Pola Negri, in making her an example of overt female sexuality. And they ended up making a picture called Rosita. The film was well reviewed. It was a financial success, not huge, but it made money. Lubitsch, at that point, signed a contract with Warner Brothers, who was looking for prestige. And he brought it to them. He was at Warner Brothers for 3 years, and also did the picture with Pola Negri, Forbidden Paradise, at Paramount in that same period on a loan-out basis. So he was actually highly in demand through the silent period between two different studios. And his pictures brought prestige, they got a lot of notice, and he began to make more contemporary stories than he had been making in Germany, and infuse them with what became known as the Lubitsch touch, which was a sort of naughty sexuality, double entendre. The idea of casual adultery amongst the upper classes.
Oh! Tell me about yourself.
Well, there isn't much to tell. I just fly a bomber.
Oh, how perfectly thrilling.
I don't know about it being thrilling, but it's quite a bomber. You might not believe it, but I can drop 3 tons of dynamite in 2 minutes.
Really?
Does that interest you?
Certainly does.
Billy Wilder told me that Lubitsch really deserved a script credit on every movie he ever made. He never took one, but he deserved one. And the refrain that Wilder remembered hearing all the time was, does this ring the bell? Is this the best we can do? He was never satisfied with the first effort or the second effort, the third effort. He refined and refined and refined. And Wilder said that what he did generically on every picture, or tried to do, was never spell everything out for the audience. Get them involved in the process of ascertaining the plot, in the process of ascertaining the characters. Weller said he would give them 2 plus 2 plus 2, but he would not say it equals 6. He would make them add it up. He'd give them everything they needed to know about the characters, about the movement of the plot, but he would always make the audience be the final participant. And Wilder said that's what's been lost, he thought, in modern filmmaking.
Girls, the gentleman wants to be entertained. Here they are. All your little tonight. And not a tomorrow among them.
For a long time, Lubitsch made films about the life he would like to have led and the man he would like to have been. Boulevardiers who are completely in control of their erotic life, of their social life, and who never really see them sweat. And it's a fantasy, because life's not like that. In his own life, Lubitsch had 2 marriages, both unsuccessful. So what he put on the screen was nothing he ever experienced directly. As he aged, he began shifting in the late 30s, and he began moving away from stories of men and women who controlled their erotic lives and treated people like little puppets. And he moved into making stories about the people he actually knew and the man he actually was.
When have you become so interested in my idea of what's wrong?
Well, I want to please you, Mr. Kralik. After all, I'm working under you.
And you don't have to keep harping on that.
Oh, no, I didn't mean it that way at all, Mr. Kralik. Regardless of what I think of you personally, I believe that anybody who works with you and doesn't get a great deal out of it is just plain dumb.
Just what do you mean, what you think of me personally?
Lubitsch to me is like the ocean. There's a surface current, which is the double entendres, because that's where the jokes are. But underneath the surface current, there's a much stronger current that really came to the fore towards the end of the 30s and into the 40s. And that's about love, because sex is a agreed upon transaction between 2 people. Love is a miracle. And Lubitsch knew that because love didn't work for him, except with friends. What he had instead of family was a family of friends who protected him, encircled him, and took care of him, actually. His relationships with his friends was much closer than most Hollywood relationships are. They weren't dependent upon worldly success. He wasn't status-oriented like that. And that was all part of why so many people loved him, is because he had a sense of family, had a sense of the big picture, of the way people have to take care of each other, because nobody else will. And that's the same sort of thing you see reflected in To Be or Not to Be, or Heaven Can Wait, or The Shop Around the Corner. That sense of community that he brought to the people around him, into his life and into his art.